When the taxi turned the corner and I saw my house, I felt my heart stop, not because of the excitement of coming home from the hospital, but because of the reality check waiting for me on the sidewalk. All my furniture was there, piled up like trash. The sofa where I slept during the nights my wife was dying, the table where my son learned to read, the old wall clock that marked every birthday. Everything was outside. And next to it all, fluttering among the discarded clothes, was a picture of me, smeared with dirt, the frame broken. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Are you sure this is your house, sir?" he asked, uncomfortable. I couldn't answer him. I just nodded. The stroke I had months ago had stolen part of my voice, my strength, and my pride, but not my soul. That was still intact. I got out slowly. My cane sank into the mud, and the air smelled of dampness and betrayal. A group of neighbors watched from the corner, whispering among themselves. A woman approached and touched my shoulder. "Mr. Michael, your son was here this morning. He said that you weren't coming back." I didn't understand at first. "What did he say?" I managed to ask, my voice ragged. "He thought that you had passed away, so he decided to clear out the house." I took a deep breath, so deep it felt like the air was burning my lungs. And then he appeared, my son, Julian. He was walking from the corner with a bag in his hand, dressed with the same indifference as always. When he saw me, he stopped. "Oh, you're back," he said without surprise. "You look better than I thought." I didn't respond. I don't even know how I managed to stay on my feet. The silence grew so thick I could hear the wind hitting the furniture. Julian glanced at the curb, shrugging. "Don't be mad, Dad. I thought you weren't coming back." That stuff was useless anyway. He looked at me with that arrogant half-smile he had inherited from his mother. "Besides, the house looks bigger this way." I don't know how long I stood there looking at him. His face, so much like mine and yet so foreign, reminded me of everything I had given and everything he had taken. I raised him alone, broke my back to put him through school, gave up everything to see him happy. And now here he was, standing in front of me, justifying my premature burial. But I said nothing. Not yet. I just rested my hand on my cane, looked at my furniture thrown on the sidewalk, and felt something inside me, something old, patient, quiet, waking up. But before continuing, I would like to know if you subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and if you like this story. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my tales. Now, let's continue. Julian went into the house without even offering to help me. "I'm heading to work," he said. "If you want, you can put your things away. Although, honestly, I doubt it's worth the trouble." He left, whistling, leaving the door open. The echo of his footsteps faded, and only then did I dare to go inside. The interior was a skeleton, the walls bare, the floor covered in dust. Every corner felt like a memory torn violently from my mind. The spot where the picture of Lucy, my wife, used to hang had a lighter mark on the paint, like a wound. I moved forward, leaning on my cane, until I reached the bedroom. The old mattress was gone, and so was the wardrobe. Only a wooden box remained on the floor. I recognized that box immediately. Lucy had used it to store our family mementos, the letters we wrote when I worked at the factory, photos of Julian as a child, his school medals. I knelt as best I could and opened it. A faint scent of lavender still lingered inside. The letters were yellowed, but intact. Underneath, I found something else. A sealed envelope with the old logo of the Southern States Bank, and a note in my wife's delicate handwriting. "Michael, if you ever need to start over, here is everything we saved together." I froze, the envelope in my hand. I didn't understand. I didn't remember this money, didn't remember saving anything but my exhaustion and my years at that bank. But Lucy had always been a planner. Maybe, even after death, she was still looking out for me. I carefully put the envelope in my coat pocket. I sat on an empty box and looked around. The empty house seemed to watch me, waiting for me to do something. Teresa, my neighbor, came in quietly. "I brought you some hot soup, Mr. Michael," she said tenderly. "You shouldn't be here alone," I smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Teresa. I'll manage." "How could your son do this?" she asked, outraged. "After everything you sacrificed for him?" I didn't know what to say. Sometimes, the simplest questions are the ones that hurt the most. She looked at me for a moment, then lowered her voice. "Don't just take this, Mr. Michael. God sees everything." I nodded. "I know, Teresa, but this time God won't be the only one watching." Her expression changed. Something in my voice made her take a half step back. "What do you mean?" I gave a slight smile, not answering. I'm just saying that a man doesn't die when his things are taken away. He dies when he forgets who he is. And I still remember. I didn't sleep that night. My body was shaking, not from the stroke, but from contained rage. I heard the door open around midnight. Julian was back. He was laughing on the phone with someone, saying things like, "Yeah, the space is all clear. I'll start selling tomorrow." And in that instant, I knew my house was no longer my house. But I also knew my story wasn't over yet. I got up slowly. I looked out the window at the empty sidewalk and whispered to the air, "Lucy, it looks like we have one last lesson to teach." And in my chest, where there were no tears left, a cold, dangerous, luminous calm began to grow. The calm of a man who has decided not to die without justice. The dawn found me sitting in the empty kitchen, with Teresa's soup now cold on the table. The silence in the house was so thick it felt like it had weight. No clock, no radio, no voice. Just the sound of the wind coming through a broken window and the creak of my cane against the floor. I looked at my trembling hands. They still bore the marks of effort, of years working in the wood shop, of sleepless hours to give Julian whatever he asked for. Every wrinkle was a memory, and every scar a story he had forgotten. At the hospital, they told me to avoid strong emotions. "Watch your blood pressure, Mr. Michael," the nurses would repeat. But how do you avoid the pain when the one hurting you shares your blood? How do you rest your heart when the blow comes from inside your own home? Outside, the furniture remained piled up like silent witnesses. The sofa, the chairs, the broken photos. Everything that was once my life was now exposed to the sun in front of the neighbors. I saw a dog sniffing around my things, chewing on a piece of the cushion where Lucy used to sit, and something inside me broke. I took a breath, got up with difficulty, and went out onto the porch. The neighbors pretended not to look, but I felt their attention. Some wanted to help, others just wanted to watch the show. Among them, I saw Teresa crossing the street with a thermos in her hand. "Good morning, Mr. Michael," she said in her sweet voice. "I brought you some fresh coffee." "You shouldn't have bothered, Teresa." "It's no bother." She set the thermos on the low wall. "I couldn't just stay home knowing you were here all alone." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the sidewalk full of memories. "I never imagined your son would be capable of something like this," she murmured. "Neither did I," I replied. "But children aren't born ungrateful, Teresa. They're made that way." She looked at me, intrigued. "And who makes them that way?" "Life, I suppose. And parents who love too much." Her eyes grew moist. "You know, Mr. Michael? My son also left years ago. He doesn't call, he doesn't write. Sometimes I think getting old means becoming invisible to the ones you raised." "No, Teresa," I said slowly. "Getting old isn't about becoming invisible. It's about seeing too much and not being able to say a word." We were quiet for a while. The sun began to warm the street, and the smell of coffee brought back a sudden memory of Lucy. She always said the smell of coffee was the perfume of new beginnings. Maybe that's exactly what I needed. A beginning. I looked back at the wooden box I had left in the kitchen. The envelope from the bank was still inside, waiting for me. "Teresa, could you stay here for a moment?" I asked her. "Of course." "Are you going out?" "Just to the bank. I need to check on something." The walk to the Southern States Bank felt eternal. Every step with my cane was a reminder of my fragility, but also of my determination. The employees looked at me with respect, perhaps with pity. I went to the counter and handed over the envelope. "Good morning," I said, forcing myself to speak clearly. This account was in the name of Michael Miller. "I'd like to know if it still exists." The young woman at the counter checked her computer. "Yes, sir. It's active, but—" She looked at me with surprise. "There's something else." "What is it?" "It shows a recurring deposit from many years ago, with accumulated interest. Quite significant, I would say." I was breathless. Lucy. That woman had been wiser than all of us. While I was wearing myself out working, believing the future depended on my son, she had secured my old age without saying a word. "Can I access that money?" I asked. "Yes, of course, but you'll need to update your identification and sign some documents." "I'll do whatever it takes." As I was signing, the young woman said, "You're very lucky, Mr. Miller. Not many people plan for their future like this." I looked her in the eyes and replied, "It wasn't luck. It was love." Leaving the bank, the fresh air hit my face. I didn't feel joy or relief. I felt something different. Clarity. For the first time in a long time, I had something my son couldn't touch, or sell, or throw in the trash. I had control. I had dignity. I walked slowly back home, thinking about everything that money represented. I could move, start a new life, but I could also use it for something more, to teach him a lesson he would never forget. When I arrived, Teresa was sweeping the sidewalk. "How did it go, mister?" "Michael? Well, better than well. I'm glad." "Teresa," I said, with a calm that surprised even me, "do you believe in justice?" "Of course I do, though sometimes it takes a while to arrive." "Sometimes it doesn't come on its own," I replied. "Sometimes you have to lead it by the hand." She looked at me, not fully understanding, but with that intuition good souls have. She knew something had changed in me. "Be careful, Mr. Michael. Don't do anything that will harm you." "Don't worry," I smiled. "I'm just going to get back what's mine." That night, as the wind blew hard and the neighborhood lights went out one by one, I opened the envelope from the bank on the table. Inside were the statements, the numbers, Lucy's signature, and in a corner, a smaller piece of paper with her handwriting. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means you're alone. But it also means you still have the strength to start again. Don't use this money to survive. Use it to remember who you are." I caressed those words as if they were her face, and I understood that my wife hadn't left me money. She had left me power, the power to decide my own ending, and also to write the beginning of the lesson my son would never forget. I closed the box, turned off the lamp, and looked up at the ceiling. The echo in the house no longer sounded so empty. For the first time since the stroke, I didn't feel like a patient. I felt like a man with a purpose. Tomorrow, I thought, the rest of my life begins, and this time I don't plan on leaving it on the sidewalk. I barely slept that night. It wasn't the insomnia of an old man complaining about pain or cold. It was something else, a silent fire that kept me awake. Something like hope, or maybe revenge. The wooden box was on the table, lit by the yellow glow of the bedside lamp. I had made it myself more than 30 years ago, when Lucy and I had just gotten married. I remember how she patiently varnished it, wiping it with her small hands, smiling at me and saying, "This will hold everything we don't want to lose." I never imagined it would end up holding what would save my life. I ran my fingers over the surface. The smell of old varnish was still there, mixed with that sweet scent I always associated with her. I opened the lid slowly, and the memories jumped out as if they had been waiting for this moment for decades. There were photos, letters, medals, old receipts. Each piece of paper held the weight of a day of my life. I found a folded letter inside an ivory-colored envelope. It was from Lucy, dated 1998. Her handwriting was firm, rounded, full of that elegance only women who learn to write with love possess. It said, "Michael, if this box ever falls into your hands when you're alone, don't cry. Don't think I've left you. I'll be in every decision you make, as long as you make it with a clean heart. Promise me one thing, that you will never let them treat you like a burden, that you will never allow the love you gave to become a debt." I read those lines over and over. Lucy knew me too well. She knew I could endure physical pain, but not humiliation. And that was exactly what Julian had done. Humiliated me, reduced me to a piece of old furniture. I wiped the tears with the back of my hand and continued to look inside the box. Among the photos, I found something else. A small notebook with a worn cover. It was the notebook where Lucy kept the household accounts. Every page was a meticulous record of our expenses, our savings, our hopes, and at the end, there was a list with a single word written in capital letters, Fund. Below it, there was an email address for the Southern States Bank, an account number, and a brief note. Monthly deposits, keep in reserve. Purpose, Michael's security. I took a deep breath, so it hadn't been an accident. My wife had prepared everything in silence, without telling me, to protect me even after her death. This woman who cooked with the radio on and sang old songs had been my guardian angel without me even knowing it. But what impressed me most was that at the bottom of the page, in her firm handwriting, she had added, "If Julian loses his way, let life teach him. Do not save him. Only then will he understand what it means to have a father." I closed my eyes. The air escaped my chest as if I had taken another blow. Lucy had seen it coming. Years ago, she already knew what her son would become. And still, she had left me the tools to survive him. The next day, I sat on the porch with the box on my lap. Teresa appeared early, as always, with her thermos of coffee and that curious look that needs no words. "Did you find anything, Mr. Michael?" she asked. "Yes," I answered, without taking my eyes off the box. "More than I imagined. And is that good or bad?" "It depends," I said with a half-smile. For me, it's good. For others, not so much. She smiled, too, though she didn't fully understand. Don't think about revenge, Mr. Michael. Hate makes you sick. No, Teresa, I denied gently. This isn't hate. It's memory. And what do you plan to do? I don't know yet. But Lucy left me a path, and I intend to follow it. Teresa looked at me for a moment, as if she wanted to say something but held back. Then, she sighed. Whatever it is, do it calmly. People who act with a clean heart always win, even if it takes time. When she left, I went inside the house and walked to the desk. I spread all the papers out on the table, organizing them by date. As I did, something caught my eye. In one of the bank letters, there was a mention of a preferred investment plan, with automatic renewal every 10 years. The signature belonged to an old manager, a certain Ralph Montenegro, a man I remembered from my working years. He had been my co-worker at the factory before he was promoted. An honest man, a man of his word. I looked for him that same afternoon. The bank's phone number connected me to his office. His voice sounded aged, but still strong. Michael Miller? He said, surprised. How long has it been, old friend? Ralph, I need to see you, I replied. It's about a fund my wife left here years ago. Of course, come by tomorrow. And don't worry, I remember those papers. Your wife was more organized than the bank itself. I hung up and stared at the box. Lucy had left everything in order, even the right people. It was as if she had foreseen every step, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled from the heart. That night Julian came home late. He said nothing as he entered. He just turned on the TV, opened a beer, and plopped down on the new sofa he had bought. He glanced at me, disinterested. Did you go to the bank, Dad? He asked. It caught me by surprise. How did you know? Teresa told me. He smiled with disdain. Nosy old woman. I didn't answer. I just watched him. There was something in his tone that confirmed what I already suspected. He knew there was money. Maybe he was even planning to take it for himself. I planted my cane on the floor. I leaned towards him and said in a low voice, Yes, I went to the bank. But don't you worry, son. There's nothing there that would interest you. He let out a dry laugh. Don't underestimate me, old man. Everything you have will be mine sooner or later. I remained silent. It wasn't worth arguing. But as I watched him drink with arrogance, I understood something that brought me calm. He didn't know it was already too late. That the game had begun, and that this time I had designed the board. That night, before sleeping, I opened the notebook one more time. I ran my hand over Lucy's name, engraved on the first page, and whispered, You promised you would take care of me, and you are. Then I added a new sentence in pencil, below her last note. He who forgets his roots deserves to lose his shadow. I closed the box, turned off the light, and let the darkness envelop me. For the first time since the stroke, I slept without fear. Not because there was no danger, but because I knew I was no longer the one in danger. They say you never forget the day your child is born, and it's true. I can still hear Julian's cry the first time he took a breath, the tremor in my hands when I held him, the sparkle in Lucy's eyes as she cradled him. He's just like you, she told me. And I, without knowing why, cried, not from fear or joy, but from a feeling I didn't understand then, the responsibility of creating someone who would either surpass you or destroy you. Julian grew up fast. He was a curious, intelligent boy, the pride of the neighborhood. Lucy dressed him meticulously, took him to school every morning, and in the afternoons he would run to me when I got home from work, shouting, Dad, look what I drew. His drawings were simple, but there was always a house with 3 people and a dog we never had. Sometimes I think that on those papers was the family he wanted to keep, and that over the years, without realizing it, he learned to despise it. When Lucy got sick, Julian was 15, too young to understand death, but old enough to fear it. I tried to stay strong, not to show my anguish, but the days fell on me like an endless rain. Lucy, in her soft voice, would tell me, Don't let him see your pain. Children imitate what you show them. And so I did. I saved every tear for when he was asleep. I buried every worry behind a forced smile. But when she died, something in Julian changed. He stopped looking me in the eyes. He no longer said Dad, but Michael. It was as if my name separated him from childhood, as if saying it made him feel like an adult. At first, I thought it was a phase. Adolescence, grief, the emptiness. But the years passed, and instead of healing, that distance became a habit. I remember the day I paid for his college. I had saved every penny, working overtime, repairing furniture on the side, taking jobs my body could no longer handle. I gave him the money in an envelope. He took it without looking at me. "Thanks, Michael," he said without emotion. It wasn't that he called me by my name that hurt. It was that his voice had not an ounce of gratitude. For years, I believed my duty was to give him everything. But I didn't understand that there's an invisible line where limitless love turns into poison. I spoiled him with sacrifices, and he grew up believing he deserved everything without effort. When he graduated, he barely called me. I only found out through others that he had gotten a good job. And I, with the clumsy pride of a humble parent, told myself, as long as he's okay, that's enough. But it wasn't enough, because the first time he came to see me, 3 years later, he didn't come to say hello. He came to ask for money. I remember that afternoon perfectly. I was in the woodshop, sanding a table for a client. Julian walked in without a greeting, wearing expensive cologne and a leather jacket. "Old man, I need to borrow something." "How much is something?" I asked, without stopping my work. "About 30,000. $30,000? What for?" "For an investment," he said with that smirk of someone who thinks they're smarter than everyone else. "You'll see. It will pay back double." I knew it was a lie. His eyes avoided mine, and his voice sounded rushed. But I gave it to him anyway, because in my mind, I still heard Lucy. Never deny him an opportunity. I didn't know then that it would be the last time he would ask me for money looking me in the face. The next times, it was by text message or through other people. And when I finally said no, he called me selfish. "I gave you everything!" I shouted at him that night, and he replied, "That's exactly why. It's about time you gave something back." That sentence pierced my soul. I suddenly understood that the perfect son I had raised didn't exist. All that was left was an empty man, incapable of valuing anything because he never had to fight for anything. Then came the stroke. It was a Sunday afternoon. I remember I was fixing a picture frame, and I felt my hand go numb. I fell to the floor, and everything became a blur. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, surrounded by machines, and next to me was Julian. I thought it was a sign that maybe fate was giving us another chance. But his face showed no concern, only calculation. "Don't move, old man. The doctor says you could get worse," he said, looking at his watch. "I'm going to sort out some papers." "What papers?" I asked in a weak voice. "The insurance, and some things for the house." The nurse looked at me with pity. She understood. I didn't want to. I preferred to believe he was worried about me, until I came home and found my furniture on the sidewalk. Now, sitting by the window, looking at the empty street, I wonder where I lost him. Was it the day I saw him cry for the first time and promised to protect him from everything? Or the day I gave him so much that I made him incapable of valuing anything? Maybe we parents don't realize that by sparing our children from pain, we condemn them to a life without empathy. I protected him from hunger, from cold, from sadness, and he grew up believing the world owed him obedience. But not anymore. His time of impunity is over. Because now I have something he doesn't. Memory, patience, and a box full of secrets that his mother and I built with love. That night, while Julian slept in his room, I stayed awake writing in a new notebook. It wasn't a diary or a letter. It was a kind of testament of the soul, a list of everything that had been taken from me and everything I was going to get back. On the first line, I wrote, "Lucy, we didn't raise a monster, just a son who never learned to be afraid. But I'm going to teach him what it means to lose." I turned off the lamp, leaned my cane against the bed, and smiled. The weak old man who came back from the hospital was dead, and in his place, someone new was born. A man who had learned that patience can be the most dangerous weapon of all. It doesn't take being young to learn how to pretend. I discovered that recently, when I realized that silence can be more powerful than any word. Since I came back from the hospital, I've become a spectator in my own house. And that, strangely, has given me an advantage. Men who think they own the world always underestimate those who walk slowly. Julian didn't know I was watching him. He didn't know that behind my every move was a mind that was wide awake, attentive, measuring his every gesture, every word, every pause. The son who had written me off was being analyzed by the man who brought him into the world. It all started with something small, a phone call. I was in the kitchen preparing tea when I heard his voice from the living room. "Yeah, it's almost done," he was saying. "The signature is the only thing left." His tone was quick, nervous, like someone afraid of being caught. I stood still, without making a sound. "No, don't worry. My father doesn't understand anything about papers. He's old." He laughed, and that laugh cut through me like a knife. I didn't go in, I didn't yell, I just waited. I waited like a carpenter who knows the exact sound of wood just before it breaks. When he hung up, he looked at me and faked a smile. "What's wrong, old man? Can't you sleep?" "You should take your pills." "I already took them." I lied. "Well, then go get some rest. I have work to do." He went up to his room with his phone in his hand, quickening his pace. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened the wooden box again and spread the papers on the table. I needed to understand what he was after. The bank fund was still a mystery to him, but there was a phrase in one of the documents that caught my attention: real estate assets subject to joint ownership. That meant my house was legally tied to that account. If anyone tried to sell it, the bank would be notified. There it is, I thought. Lucy had foreseen everything, even her son's greed. The next morning, he came down late, with his phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, I can go to the notary's office tomorrow," he said while pouring coffee. "No problem. He'll sign." I watched him from the table, pretending to read the newspaper. "Who will sign what?" I asked, without looking up. "Nothing important. Work stuff." "Don't worry about it, old man." His tone was sharp, authoritarian, and in his eyes I saw what I had never wanted to see: contempt. It wasn't anger or impatience. It was that cold look of someone who no longer sees you as a person, but as an obstacle. I finished my coffee and got up without a word. The cane hit the floor with a dry, firm sound that made him look at me for a moment. "Julian," I said slowly, "do you know what woodworking taught me?" "What's that?" "That some woods look strong, but they're rotten on the inside." "And what does that have to do with me?" "Everything," I replied, looking him in the eyes, and I went out to the yard without waiting for his answer. In the following days, my suspicions were confirmed. A neighbor, Mr. Davis, told me he had seen Julian with a real estate agent taking pictures of the front of the house. He said the house was going on the market, the man told me, uncomfortable. "I thought you had agreed." "Thank you, Mr. Davis," I replied. "But no, I have not agreed." That same afternoon I found an envelope in the mailbox. It was a copy of a declaration of intent to sell document in Julian's name. My signature was forged, but so clumsily that he hadn't even bothered to practice it well. There was the proof. My own son was trying to sell my house while I was still breathing under its roof. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity, the kind of clarity that comes when you're no longer afraid. And with that calm, I made the most important decision of my life. I wouldn't confront him yet. I would let him proceed. I wanted to see him fall under his own weight, just like a rotten branch that breaks without anyone touching it. That night, I called Ralph Montenegro, my old friend from the bank. "Ralph, I need your help." "Anything, Michael." "I want to protect my house and my account, but without my son finding out." "I understand. We can block any sale attempt without your authorization." "Do it. But I need something more." "What is it?" "I want it to look like I don't know anything." "Are you planning something?" "No, Ralph," I said, smiling to myself. "I'm learning." Ralph laughed. "You're the same as always. A quiet man with dangerous ideas." "Not dangerous," I replied, "just—" The following days were a carefully rehearsed play. I feigned tiredness, confusion, clumsiness. I would misplace my keys, leave papers in plain sight, and pretend not to remember things. Julian let his guard down. He would come down to breakfast, whistling, thinking everything was under control. One afternoon, while he was on the phone, I heard him say, "We sign tomorrow. If everything goes well, I'll be moving out in 2 weeks." From the yard, I pretended to do some gardening, but inside, I was counting down the days. That night, before sleeping, I opened the box one more time. Inside was a picture of Julian as a child. He was 6 years old. He was in my workshop, holding a hammer bigger than his hand. He was smiling with pride, saying, "Look, Dad, I can build too." And now that same boy was trying to destroy everything we had built. I took the photo and put it in my pocket. Not to remember him, but to not forget who I was facing. The next morning, I saw him leave early, with an envelope under his arm. The wind rustled the curtains, and the dining room clock struck 8. I waited for him to be far away, then picked up the phone and called the bank. "Ralph, it's Michael." "I'm listening. The time has come." "Are you sure?" "More than ever." "Then I'll be waiting for you. Bring the document I prepared for you." I hung up and looked towards the door. The sun streamed through the window, and the dust in the air seemed to sparkle as if someone were guiding me. "Lucy," I thought, "this is the beginning of the end." I dressed slowly, took my cane, and left the house. Behind me were the empty walls and the echo of a voice that no longer hurt me, because from that moment on, the sick old man was officially dead, and in his place walked a man who was about to teach his own son that the dead can also surprise the living. Before we continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far, and what you would do in his place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Patience is not passivity. It is strategy in winter. I learned that from watching Lucy sew, holding her breath as the needle pierced the fine fabric. Now, with the closed box by my side and my son's photo in my pocket, I too was weaving a plan that needed no hurry, only time. The bank, Ralph, and I were the threads. The law. The needle. I went to the Southern States Bank with measured steps, without rush or show. Ralph was waiting for me in his office, wearing the same tie I remembered from the old days, and a smile that hid both sympathy and prudence. "Michael," he said, "are you sure about this?" I nodded. "Yes, but I don't want it to look like revenge. I want it to look like order, legality, so that when it all happens, no one can say it was unfair." I explained in a low voice about the forged papers, the intent to sell, the photos of the house, and the calls I had overheard. Ralph frowned. "Your wife left legal safeguards. It's likely that if they try to sell, the bank will automatically block it. But for that, we need to prepare irrefutable proof of his attempt at fraud. And how do we get that without him suspecting with time and cunning? We'll let him go a little further, sign a few more documents, and when he makes a formal move, we'll intervene." I left the bank with the strange feeling of someone returning a favor by right. I didn't enjoy the idea of humiliating him, but I longed to teach him a lesson that would cleanse him from the inside. As I walked down the avenue, I thought about the concrete steps. First, secure the legal ownership of the house. Ralph told me there were protective clauses, but we needed to update them. Second, create a public story that showed Julian as the driving force behind the process, not as an innocent victim. Third, protect the neighbors and Teresa so no one could say I had manipulated the situation. In the week that followed, I did what my body allowed. I signed documents at the bank, changed beneficiaries, and left precise instructions with my lawyer. Each signature was another stitch in the legal trap, but also an act of liberation. My hand trembled at times, but my pulse was no longer driven by fear, but by decision. At night, I reviewed everything in the notebook, where I used to write down carpentry orders. Now I wrote down dates, names, reasons. Meanwhile, I played the part of the frail old man. I would drop books, forget my keys, act confused by the papers he left in plain sight. Julian lowered his guard. He would talk about his plans in front of the TV, without restraint, with the confidence that impunity gives. One afternoon, I heard him tell someone, "When this goes through, I'm starting a business and sending you to the beach, old man." His words felt like salt in a wound. But the key was not to open a case against him. It was to use his own pride against him. So I spoke discreetly with two women in the neighborhood, Mrs. Martha, who ran the corner store, and Rose, the church secretary. I asked them if they could testify, when the time came, that it was Julian who was promoting the sale. Both nodded without judgment, with the knowing look of those who have seen honor dragged through the street. I told them, "If that document ever surfaces, please, say it out loud. Let people know he was in a hurry to get rid of what was ours." The legal trap also had an emotional one. I knew that if I left him without resources abruptly, people would pity him, and the lesson would be lost. So I organized small public gestures. I donated an old chair to the library, repaired the park fence with trembling hands, and with Teresa's help, I organized a community dinner where I gave a speech about effort and memory. The community saw me as active and generous. If Julian tried to sell the house, he would be the one to look bad in front of everyone. One of those nights, Ralph called me. He signed something important. My heart leaped in a way my cane couldn't stop. "He signed what?" I asked, with a calm I struggled to fake. "Intentions and power of attorney to represent the sale before a notary. He did it online, from his phone, but he made a mistake. He registered it with his work address, not the house address. We have an email chain that links him to it." I smiled without showing my teeth. "Perfect," I said to myself. Ralph proceeded to block any transfers and prepare the documentation to file a challenge when the time came. He explained that the bank would have to act quickly to protect the assets of the rightful owner. From that moment on, the wait became more tense. Every time Julian came down for breakfast, he would look at my face, searching for a sign. He found nothing. I drank my coffee slowly, savoring the certainty that the story was finally turning in my favor. One day, I dropped a photograph from the workshop where the three of us appeared: Lucy, myself, and an 11-year-old Julian, holding a piece of wood with pride. He found it a moment later. "You still keep that?" he asked, feigning interest. "Just memories," I answered, "and I don't plan on leaving them on the curb again." The plan wasn't cruel. It was educational. I wanted the pride that had made him grow at my expense to become the lesson he needed to not repeat his life. And as the city went on with its rhythm, I fine-tuned the last details. I knew that justice, when it takes a human form, can also be merciful. But for mercy to work, there must first be truth. That night I went to bed with the curious feeling of someone who has once again become the master of his own destiny. The wooden box rested under the table, closed, silent. And I, with the light off, promised myself never again to be anyone's shadow. Tomorrow, the warning bell would ring. The rest, I thought, would be history forever. They say writing a will is accepting that the end is near. That's not true. It's more a way of setting the stage for those who remain. And I wasn't going to leave this world without putting the pieces in their place. Ralph had done his part. The bank was shielded, the house was secure, and Julian's movements were monitored. The most important thing was missing: the written word, the kind that weighs more than years, more than speeches, more even than blood. I sought out the neighborhood lawyer, a discreet man, the kind who still believes in decency. His name was Mr. Roberts, and he received me in his small office with a mix of respect and curiosity. "How can I help you, Mr. Michael? I need to draft my will. But not an ordinary one. I want it to be instructive." "Instructive?" he asked, smiling. "Yes. I'm not looking to distribute money. I want to distribute truths." Mr. Roberts watched me for a moment, understanding that I was serious. "Very well," he said, opening his folder. "Let's begin." I told him everything, every detail: the abandonment, the betrayal, the covert sale, the hidden fund, Lucy's letters. I omitted nothing. And when I finished, the man's eyes were glassy. "That's a tough story, Mr. Michael. Not as tough as the lesson my son needs to learn." The will started simply: my details, my house, the fund, personal belongings. But then, with Mr. Roberts's help, I added the conditions. First, I declared that my primary heir would be Mrs. Teresa, the neighbor who had stood by me when no one else did. She would receive the house and a portion of the fund with a special clause. If, at the time of my death, my son Julian fails to demonstrate that he has assisted or accompanied me, he will automatically lose any right to inheritance. Mr. Roberts looked up. "And how will that be proven?" "With witnesses. The entire neighborhood knows he left me alone." "I see. But that wasn't all." I added a second clause. "If my son attempts to contest this document or take any legal action against it, the entire estate will pass to charitable institutions under my wife's name, Lucy Miller. That's irreversible, Mr. Roberts warned me. "It has to be." Finally, I wrote a letter in my own hand to be attached to the document, with the instruction that it only be read in the presence of Julian and the witnesses on the day of my death. That letter, more than a farewell, would be my voice returning from the grave. When I finished, I signed the will with a steady hand. Mr. Roberts shook my hand. "You've been very clear, Mr. Michael. But don't you feel sad leaving everything outside your family?" "On the contrary," I replied. "I feel relief. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about memory." That night the air felt lighter. Teresa came to bring me some hot soup. "You look different today, Mr. Michael," she said, "as if a weight has been lifted from your shoulders." Maybe it has. She sat across from me, her hands clasped. "You know, I always thought that men don't know how to forgive." "It depends on the man," I said. "I'm not seeking revenge, I'm seeking balance." "And do you think you'll find it?" "I don't know, but it's enough for me to know that when I'm gone, everything will return to its rightful place." Teresa looked at me tenderly. "Your wife would be proud of you." "I hope so," I replied, looking at Lucy's photo on the sideboard. She was the compass. I'm just following the path. That morning, I woke up and opened the window. The city was asleep. The wind brought the smell of freshly baked bread and distant rain. I thought of Julian, of the boy he was, of the arrogant young man, of the empty man he had become. And I wondered if there was still any goodness in him, something that could be saved, because even though I no longer loved him as I once did, it still hurt to lose him. I took my cane, went to the wooden box, and placed the will inside, along with Lucy's letters and a new note. "If you read this, son, don't look for my money. Look for my truth." I locked the box. The sound of the metal turning was the closing of a chapter, the sealing of a wound. The following days were calm. I read the newspaper, walked in the yard, greeted the neighbors. Julian, on the other hand, was restless. He received calls, made visits, reviewed papers. I pretended not to notice, although every time he passed by me, I felt his suspicious gaze. One afternoon he said to me, "Old man, were you at the bank again?" "Yes." "And what did you do there?" "Updated my signature." "Why?" "Because times change, son, and you have to leave everything in order." He laughed, but his laugh sounded tense. "In order for what? Are you planning on dying or something?" "Someday," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "But not today." The silence became awkward. He turned around and went up the stairs, muttering something I couldn't hear. That was the last time I saw him calm. That night, at my workbench, I wrote in the notebook again. This time, it wasn't plans or calculations. It was a reflection. I wrote, "There is no worse inheritance than guilt, but some need to receive it to understand the value of forgiveness. I don't want him to suffer. I just want him to wake up." I put down the pencil, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. For the first time since my stroke, I felt no pain. Not physical, not in my soul. It was the feeling of having fulfilled a pending task, of having transformed grievance into justice without raising my voice. I looked at the box one last time before turning off the lamp. Lucy would be proud, and although my body felt heavy, my spirit felt light. The board was set. All that was left was for life to move the pieces. The air that afternoon was heavy with foreboding. There was something different in the wind, as if the entire world was preparing for an invisible tremor. I felt it on my skin, in my chest, in the footsteps that echoed too loudly in the hallway. Lucy always said that the soul can sense a storm before it arrives, and that afternoon I knew. The storm had my son's face. Julian arrived earlier than usual. Not a word of greeting. He just came in and slammed the door. He held a folder of documents in his hand, folded, almost crumpled, as if he had been squeezing it with rage the whole way. "What did you do, old man?" was the first thing he said. His voice wasn't a question, but a threat. "What are you talking about, son?" "Don't call me son," he spat the word. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." He dropped the folder on the table. The papers scattered like wounded birds. They were notarized copies, bank statements, emails. Ralph had warned me that the notary had rejected the transaction, but I didn't expect him to react like this, with so much hatred. "What is this?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Don't play dumb," he shouted, slamming the table. "You knew I was about to sell this house." "Sell it without consulting me?" "It was mine too," he said, though we both knew he was lying. "No, Julian, this house is not for sale." "Of course," he laughed bitterly. "It's not for sale because you, with your schemes, blocked everything. I only protected what belongs to me." He came closer, his eyes blazing. "What did you gain, old man? Ruining me? Making me look like a thief?" "I didn't need to do that," I said calmly. "You did that all by yourself." For a moment, silence filled the house. All that could be heard was the hallway clock and the faint hum of the fan. Julian looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost pitiful. "Your whole life thinking you're a saint," he said, clenching his fists. "But you're nothing but a manipulator." "It's you, Julian," I replied, looking him in the eyes. "You are living proof of what happens when you confuse love with permission." That enraged him. He hit the table, knocked over a chair. The noise made Teresa peek out from her window. I raised a hand, signaling for her not to worry. Julian kept shouting, "Everything I have, I owe to you. That's what you always wanted me to feel. An eternal debt." "No, son. I wanted you to feel gratitude, not guilt." "Lies!" His voice broke. "You made me weak. You made me dependent. And now—" He stopped, breathing heavily. "Now you steal from me." Then I saw it. I saw something more than anger in his eyes. I saw fear. Not fear of losing money, but of facing what he had done. For an instant, I thought he would break down, but no. His pride was stronger than his soul. He took a set of keys from his pocket and threw one on the table. "There you go. The key to the house. I don't want it." "What are you saying?" "You can keep everything. But don't expect me to ever set foot in this damn tomb again." He walked to the door, but stopped before leaving. "And don't think you've won so easily. I can still contest your papers. Go ahead. I said with a serene smile. "I invite you to try." He left and slammed the door so hard the dining room window rattled. The echo resonated in my bones, but not in my soul, because in that slam I understood that there was nothing left to regret. The blood we shared had run dry. That night, I stayed alone in the living room with the scattered papers. I picked them up one by one. Each sheet told the story of his greed. Photocopies, signatures, emails where he impersonated me. It was all there, like a file on his soul. I put everything in a new folder. I labeled it in my handwriting, Final Truth, and I placed it inside the wooden box. I poured myself a glass of wine. I hadn't had a drink since Lucy died, but that night I toasted to her silent wisdom, to her foresight, to her love that guided me even from beyond. "You did it, my love," I whispered. We taught him without raising a hand. The next day Julian didn't show up. He didn't call either. But the neighborhood talked. Rumors traveled like smoke. That Mr. Michael's son had tried to sell the house. That the bank had reported him. That the father had unmasked him. And though I didn't say a single word, the truth already had its own voice. Teresa came at noon with a plate of chicken and rice. "I heard the argument," she said. "Are you all right?" "Perfectly. And your son?" "Sometimes, Teresa, there are children who need to lose everything to start finding themselves." She nodded sadly. "What you're going through is hard, Mr. Michael. Living a lie was harder. Now all that's left is to wait for life to do its work." That afternoon, the sky turned gray. The wind began to blow hard, as if wanting to erase the remnants of the past. I sat on the porch, with the box on my knees, and watched the dry leaves roll down the street. I thought of my wife, of the young carpenter I once was, of the boy Julian once was, and how, unintentionally, life had come full circle. Because in the end, I understood, it wasn't revenge I was seeking. It was justice and peace. And that peace, at last, had arrived. That night I slept soundly, without dreams, without jolts, just a gentle silence, like that of those who know that destiny is already written and that the next chapter will write itself. And as the wind beat against the windows, I thought of the phrase Lucy used to say when something came to a close. What breaks in silence also heals in silence. I closed my eyes with a smile, because I knew that at dawn, the silence would bring its final gift. They say the worst battles make no noise, that the real wars are won in silence, with patience, with time. And I had been waiting for this moment for months. Every word, every signature, every feigned gesture had been one more step towards this morning. I woke up early. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops, tinging the air with that golden color that always reminded me of Lucy. I drank my coffee slowly, sitting on the porch, watching the empty street. I knew my son would return that day, not because he missed me, but because desperate men always return to the place where they believe they still have power, and I was not wrong. Mid-morning, I heard the sound of his car's engine. I recognized the noise before I saw it. His arrival was a spectacle of arrogance. He parked carelessly, got out with his phone in his hand, and didn't even close the car door. He was dressed, as always, excessively. A shiny watch, expensive cologne, dark sunglasses. But there was something new in his eyes. Something broken. "Good morning, old man," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, Julian. I came to talk." "To talk or to demand?" I asked without getting up. "To fix things." I watched him. That word, fix, sounded hollow. In his mouth, it didn't mean reconciliation, but strategy. "Come in," I said. "The house is still the same, though it's emptier now." He entered, looked around, and frowned. The place was clean, tidy, but in the center of the living room was something new, a table with a white cloth and an envelope on top. The envelope bore his name. Julian saw it immediately. "What's that?" "Your surprise," I replied, pouring myself another coffee. He approached cautiously. The envelope had a notary's seal and a note from me on top. For my son, on the day he decides to return to talk. He laughed in disbelief. "Now you're writing letters like you're some kind of prophet?" "No, I write truths. And what's inside?" "Open it and see." He did. Inside was a copy of the will, a bank document, and a handwritten letter. His eyes moved quickly, jumping from line to line, until they stopped on an underlined sentence. "Any action of sale or transfer carried out without the consent of the owner will be considered fraud and reported to the authorities." His face went pale. "What is this?" he asked. Your lesson, I said calmly. You reported me? No, you reported yourself. He threw the papers on the table. This is insane. You can't do this to me. I can, I replied. And I already have. What did you do, old man? I prepared everything so that when the bank reviewed your movements, they would realize you used my name, my signature, and my address without authorization. They've already received the proof. What proof? The proof you generated yourself. The emails, the copies, the digital records. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, I saw real fear on his face. Not anger or wounded pride. Fear. No, you can't. Of course I can. But don't worry, you're not going to jail. Then what? The bank won't press charges if you return the documents, sign a waiver of any rights to this property, and leave the country. He staggered a step back. Leave the country? To where? Wherever you want, but far from here. The silence became so thick you could hear his ragged breathing. And if I don't, then the case will be opened. And believe me, banks don't forgive fraud. Why are you doing this to me? He asked in a threat of a voice. Because you brought it on yourself. Because you left me for dead. Because you sold my life before my heart stopped beating. He collapsed into a chair. His hands were trembling. For the first time in years, he wasn't the arrogant man who thought he could control everything. He was a lost boy. And that hurt me more than anything else. I went over to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. Julian, you still have time to change. This isn't revenge. It's a door. If you decide to walk through it, you can start over. But if you don't, you'll just keep falling. He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, defeated. Then, without looking up, he said, And the money? The money already has an owner. Who? Memory. What the hell does that mean? It means that nothing you covet is worth more than what you threw on the sidewalk the day you thought I was dying. He got up and walked to the door. Before leaving, he looked at me one last time. One day you're going to be truly alone, old man. No, son, I said serenely. One day you're going to understand that you're the one who's alone. When the sound of the engine faded, I opened the window. The fresh air rushed in, moving the curtains. The house smelled different. For the first time in a long time, it smelled like freedom. On the table, the open envelope was still there. Under the letter was another sheet that Julian hadn't seen. A copy addressed to the Southern States Bank with the final instruction. When Mr. Julian Miller waives his share, transfer the remaining fund to the account of the Lucy Miller Foundation. Purpose: scholarships for the children of retired workers. I put the documents in the wooden box, closed the lid, and rested my hand on it. I felt that Lucy, from somewhere, was with me. Her voice resonated in my mind. Soft, calm. Now, Michael. Now, you can rest. That evening, I sat on the porch again. The neighborhood lights were coming on one by one, and the murmur of life continued. Teresa approached with her gray scarf. Is everything all right, Mr. Michael? She asked. Everything, Teresa. Finally, everything. And your son? He found his surprise. And what was inside? A truth that took a lifetime to learn. She smiled, though she didn't fully understand. I did. The surprise wasn't the document, or the trap, or the lost money. The real surprise was seeing myself free from fear. And in that moment, I knew the end was near. But this time, it didn't scare me. Because finally, the old carpenter had finished his last piece of work. A lesson carved into the soul of his own son. Silence has always seemed to me the best witness to the truth. And this time, it would be the one to speak for me. I knew Julian would come back. Not out of affection, but out of curiosity. Men like him can't stand not having the last word. That's why, before my body failed me, I left a sealed letter on the table, with his name written in my best handwriting. Not a letter of reproach, but of memory. That night, the air was heavier than usual. It was hard to breathe, but I felt no fear. Just a strange peace, as if my soul were already packing its last belongings for the journey. Lucy, I thought, I'm tired. Tired of holding up what others have broken. Tired of waiting for gratitude where there was only ego. But I'm also grateful, because I understood that my mission was not to change my son, but to teach him with my own mistakes what it means to lose everything without losing yourself. 3 days later, when Julian crossed the threshold again, the house smelled of old wood and absence. Teresa greeted him with moist eyes. Your father passed away last night, she said in a trembling voice. He didn't respond. He just stood still, as if the words couldn't penetrate his chest. He walked to the living room, where the wooden box was open on the table, and on top of it, the letter. Trembling, he took it, The envelope had the same scent he remembered from childhood, the lavender perfume his mother used to wear. He opened it with clumsy hands, and his father's voice, written in blue ink, began to resonate in his mind. My son, if you are reading this, it means my body is no longer with me. But my voice is still with you, like the echo of things one never dares to say in life. I am not writing to judge you, nor to remind you of your mistakes. I am writing to remind you of mine. I gave you too much, Julian. I protected you so much that I robbed you of the chance to understand what it costs to earn something. And because of that, you became weak, even though the world thought you were strong. When you threw my furniture on the sidewalk, it didn't hurt me because of the objects. It hurt because I saw there all the years I thought you had learned love. But I didn't hate you, son. I just grieved. Lucy always said that children are not inheritances, they are loans, and that one day life reclaims them. That day has come for you, though you may not understand it yet. I know you feel betrayed by what I did, but it wasn't punishment. It was a mirror. I only wanted you to feel the weight of your own decisions, so that when you have a child one day, you will know how to hold him without breaking him. The money you so eagerly sought no longer exists for you, but there is something I do leave you, though you cannot touch it. My name. Do with it what you never knew how to do with your life. Honor it. There is no inheritance more valuable than a clear conscience, nor a crueler punishment than the guilt of one who knows they could have loved and did not. If you ever return to this house, do not look for gold or papers. Look for forgiveness. It is in the walls, in the air, in the smell of the coffee your mother made every morning. There, son. There I will still be waiting for you. Your father, Michael Miller. Julian let the letter fall onto the table. The tears he had held back for years burst from his face. He fell to his knees. The sound of his sobbing filled the house, an old, thick sob from a child who had never learned to say he was sorry. Teresa approached slowly. "May I?" she asked, pointing to the letter. He nodded without speaking. She read a few fragments aloud, her hands trembling. "You had a great father, Julian." He shook his head. "No. I had a saint, and I treated him like he was trash." His words came out in broken pieces. I wanted to be someone, and he just wanted you to be good," Teresa said. That was enough for him. Julian looked around. The clock was still on the wall, ticking the same hours as always. The evening shadows streamed through the window, painting everything in a faint orange hue. It was as if time had stopped, waiting for him to understand what had always been right in front of his eyes. He got up with an effort, took the letter, and walked to the workshop out back. There, on the workbench, were his father's tools, clean, organized. He ran his hand over an old wood-carving gouge, the same one Michael had used to teach him how to carve his first piece of wood. On the bench was a small, unfinished figure, a hand holding a heart. Underneath, a piece of paper with a single word written on it, "Forgiveness." Julian pressed his forehead against the wood and broke down crying. Inside, something shattered. But this time, it wasn't destruction. It was the beginning of healthy guilt. The kind that cleanses, the kind that transforms. He stayed in the house that night, in silence. He didn't turn on any lights or the television. He just listened to the sounds of the place, the same ones his father had heard so many times. The creaking of the floorboards, the whistle of the wind, the ticking of the clock. And he understood that this was the true legacy. The peace of a man who died without fear, knowing his story no longer belonged to pain. At dawn, he went out onto the porch with the letter in his hands. The sky was clear, the air smelled of bread and coffee. Teresa saw him and came over. "Will you be staying here?" she asked. "I don't know, but I want to start over. Your father would be happy to hear that." "Will he hear it?" "Of course he will," she said, looking up at the sky. "Good men always listen from somewhere." Julian smiled faintly, looked at the letter one more time, and folded it carefully. "Thank you, old man," he whispered. "I promise not to waste your name again." And for the first time, in a long time, he breathed without guilt, because he finally understood that forgiveness isn't asked for, it's demonstrated. When a man dies, what he leaves behind are not his things, but the echo of who he was. And that echo, even as my body rested, continued to resonate in the streets where I spent my life. The whole neighborhood spoke of me, not for my mistakes, but for the story that remained within those old walls, where a father's voice and a son's silence once filled the air. Teresa was the first to tell it. She said that every afternoon, when she passed the house, she could hear the sound of the hammer in the workshop, as if I were still there, patiently carving life. The neighborhood children grew up hearing fragments of the tale. Old Michael, the carpenter who taught his son with a letter, and the adults, when they repeated it, lowered their voices, because they knew that story wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. Julian stayed in the house for a few weeks. He didn't talk much. He spent his mornings in the workshop, cleaning tools, organizing planks of wood, asking the air for forgiveness. He no longer cried, but his silence had a different sound. The sound of sincere repentance. One day, the children saw him fixing the park fence and planting flowers where weeds had grown. No one asked him to. He did it alone, in silence, as if he needed to give something back to the world. Teresa would say that every Sunday she saw him enter the church with the folded letter in his pocket. He never let it go. And when the priest spoke of forgiveness, he would lower his head and smile slightly, with the expression of someone who understood late, but understood nonetheless. The neighborhood began to change. People started speaking more tenderly about the elderly. Children visited their parents with flowers. Grandchildren helped their grandparents cross the street, not out of fear of dying, but out of fear of not having loved enough. And every time someone mentioned my name, they did so with respect. Mr. Michael wasn't a perfect man, Teresa would say, but he knew how to die in peace, and not everyone can say that. A few months later, the foundation bearing Lucy's name opened its doors. The first scholarship recipient was a young man from the neighborhood, the son of a retired carpenter. When Julian met him, he gave him one of my old tools and said, "This was my father's." He wasn't the best carpenter in the world, but he was the best man I ever knew. The boy smiled, not fully understanding, and in that gesture, Julian felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child. Clean pride, without guilt. Over time, the story became almost a legend. They said that on quiet nights, the sound of the hammer could still be heard from the house, as if I were still working inside. And maybe it was true, because men don't die when they stop breathing, but when no one learns anything from them anymore. Julian, however, continued to change. He opened a small community workshop, where he taught the neighborhood youth how to carve wood. Above the entrance, he hung a hand-painted sign, "Michael Miller Workshop. Forgiveness is also built." The first time I saw it, from the place where eyes and ears no longer hurt, I knew he had finally understood. Life didn't take anything from him. It gave him a chance to start over, but this time with clean hands. Now, when the wind blows in the afternoons, I sometimes think I hear his voice among the trees in the yard. He doesn't call me old man with anger, but with affection. And when he strikes the wood, it sounds different. Firm, patient, at peace. The house is no longer a wound. It is a living inheritance. A lesson that continues to breathe among the workshop dust, the neighborhood laughter, and the voices of those who still believe that true love is not bought or inherited. It is learned, because in the end, that was what I wanted to leave to the world. The certainty that no betrayal is stronger than a heart willing to forgive. They say when the soul bids farewell to the world, time stops for a few seconds, just long enough to look back and understand everything. That's what I felt when my heart, tired but calm, stopped beating. There was no fear, only a warm light, like the reflection of the sun on newly polished wood. Since then, I walk among the echoes. I no longer have a body, but I have memory. And in that memory live my days, my loves, my silences, and my mistakes. Sometimes I visit my house. I find it different. The walls painted, flowers growing in the garden, the workshop full of laughing young people. And in their midst, Julian, my son, his hands covered in dust, teaching them to carve as I taught him. Every time he raises the hammer, I feel a slight tremor, as if my soul were still working by his side. He doesn't see me, but he feels me. Sometimes he stops, looks toward the corner where I used to sit, and smiles with moist eyes. Then I know he hears me, because between us there is no longer distance, nor guilt, nor silence. Only the peace that comes when the truth has been spoken and love understood. The neighborhood changed too. Every corner holds a piece of my story. The park bench where Lucy and I met, Teresa's shop with my picture in an old frame, the hallway clock that still marks the hour my heart stopped. But none of it hurts anymore, because I learned that death does not erase, it reveals. And what it reveals is simple, that everything we loved, if it was true, remains alive in some way. One afternoon, Julian closed the workshop and was left alone. The sun filtered through the window, gilding the air. He raised the hammer and struck the workbench one last time. The sound resonated. Clean, round, perfect. That was my last strike, though his hands delivered it. And in that instant, I knew I could leave in peace. Because my son was no longer seeking money, or power, or redemption. He was seeking something greater, meaning, as I moved away, the house fell silent. But it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of fulfilled love, of granted forgiveness, of a closed circle. And so my story ended as I always wanted it to, not with a shout, but with the soft sound of a hammer on wood, marking the eternal rhythm of a father who, at last, was understood. Sometimes life teaches us that there isn't always time to ask for forgiveness, but there is time to understand. Michael leaves us an eternal lesson, that true love seeks no reward, only to leave a mark. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from, and if this story touched your heart. Like this video if you believe no father deserves to be forgotten. And subscribe to the channel to keep hearing stories that remind us that even silence can speak of love.